Nebenstimmen. A podcast by Ensemble Modern. Nebenstimmen brings you conversations on music, art and life between ensemble members and conversation partners chosen by them. Find out what the musicians are working on at the moment and what their personal thoughts are.
Stefan, tell me, do I pronounce your name correctly? Stefan. This is the German way of saying Stefan. How do you say your name?
It's anglicized because I'm English. It's Stefan. But obviously we're in Germany, so Stefan is fine. But it's not Stephen.
Oh, no, okay, no.
Which people have tried.
Oh, no, that don't go.
They didn't get anywhere.
No. You've been coming to the Ensemble Modern now for 25 years, did we say?
Something like that. I remember it was the latter part of the 90s that I had my first experience with you.
Exactly right. And when you first came, one of the Aushilfe, one of our extra players from England, told me she knew you from conducting early music or choir in Oxford.
That's correct? Possible. Well, I did do some choral concerts in Oxford, yes. I'm not sure what she would have been thinking of because I'm not sure who it is.
Okay.
But if we were companions at Oxford, then I did do choral music there. Yeah.
Wow. So now you're doing new music, everywhere. And you do orchestral music. You are orchestral conductor.
No, it's not quite, that's not quite the line, so to speak.
Tell me.
The line, the trajectory that
yes,
happened.
Trajectory. Yeah.
It's quite simple, actually. So I like Strauss. I was a brass player, and if you're a brass player, then Mahler Strauss is what you want to do. But I am, and especially as a young man, was always very curious. So I always sought out things that I didn't know. And once you have heard and played the basic repertoire that's played and heard, and there is a lot more even that, but the basic stuff that the audiences expect to hear, there's a lot more other things to hear. And so I also studied composition. It just seemed natural for me to pursue that side as well. At the age of 14, my composing teacher at the Royal College of Music on Saturday morning, so a junior school, which I think a number of institutions have, was Oliver Knussen.
Oh, just start at the top.
Yes, exactly. Just as he'd written Where the Wild Things Are, he came back from Belgium. It was premiered in Belgium, I believe, and with clogs, and he used to wear them in these lessons. And he did 1 year at the Royal College Junior Department teaching composition, and he was my teacher. So every Saturday I would go, and I would turn up with this piece of brass music usually, and he would. I still got the sketches where he would change it just to make it more interesting, and. Which is what, as love him as we always do, he would also suggest several pieces for me to listen to. So the one I remember the most is Janáček Sinfonietta, that enormous piece with the opening with the brass and rather bizarre horn parts.
Yes.
And I remember going back to him, and my wonderful parents would always buy me a score and a tape.
Wow.
And I mean tape, I'm sorry to say, but a score and a tape, because this was the late 70s. Of whatever he'd said. And so I had this enormous tape collection. And I came back the next week and I said, that means horns can play boo, 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 which is in the piece, up to a top D, or it goes. And Ollie laughed and said, no, don't use that all the time. That doesn't mean that's what they like to do all the time. I just remember that. But yes, so I did that. And then but the playing side of my life sort of declined in terms of my interest and also because of that, because in my ability, when I went to university. And at the same time, I found conducting of anything rather. I found moving to music sort of natural.
Yeah.
And there is a technique, of course, which you can always improve, but the basic reacting to sound. That's not dancing. Reacting to sound in a way that informs other people of what comes next.
Yeah.
I found that somewhat a natural experience, more so than playing long tones on the trumpet and trying to get these two tiny muscles or just the groups of muscles in your lips to produce always the right frequency. Yeah. So it became a real interest for me. And again, it was more of the romantic classic area. And I started conducting at Oxford. and therefore including choirs. I remember doing some Handel and Purcell.
Right, that's what you talked
on
about.
St Celia's Day. Well, then it was a St Celia's Day concert in
okay.
Christchurch. Then I know exactly when it was.
Wow, okay.
Coupled with a certain amount of new music. So, for example, I mean, this is also a nice thing from my memory. In 1985, we did a piece of George Benjamin's, and he came. And guess how, I don't know how old he would have been at that point, but we put on a piece.
25, 26.
Something like that. And so he was only about 4 years older than I was. And he came.
Right.
I organised a concert of Harrison Birtwhistle's music in the Purcell Room just after I left Oxford, and he came. So I knew Harry from the age of 24. So there was clearly a side of me that was just curious about what else there was out there, but also was wanted to be an expressive musician. And to be honest with you, I've always fought against this idea that there are two musics. They're not. It's music. It just happens to be one is of a different era. So I don't really understand why people want to sort of label it. Maybe it helps in the now defunct CD stores, but it's all the same. It's music. Of course, it sounds different, but that's the same distinctions would have been had in the 18th century between composers, or the 18th century looking back to earlier composers, to Bach, which they started the 18th, 19th century. They started to bring Bach back.
Right.
And so, so no, but to answer your question a long time after you asked it, I then went to Tanglewood in the United States, which is a summer festival, and has produced many fine conductors, players, and composers. And it so happened that Leonard Bernstein was the first student at Tanglewood and used to go every summer as a teacher. When I went, that was his last year. He died literally 2 months after Tanglewood. That's in 1990. And so I studied at Tanglewood with Leonard Bernstein. And Oliver Nussen used to run all the new music at Tanglewood. So we met again after basically 10 years... 10 years hence from when he taught me. Right. And to cut a kind of a long story short, he kind of grabbed me and essentially gave me a living from September. The Tanglewood ends on August the 16th. From September the 1st of 1990, I was working with the CBSO and Simon Rattle as his kind of a little bit of an assistant, which Simon Rattle was doing and probably has continued to do for a long time since. I used to prepare the orchestra. We shared concerts. And Ollie just introduced me to these people, and they would sort of use me for various things. Ollie would always have me in his projects, which has brought many fine, wonderful memories of these projects. But of course, with that kind of a mentor, you're going to be people assuming that you're a new music person, but that's not me. But I decided very early on, this has to be simple, and I'm very glad I did, because I see people who live a complicated career life, musical career life, not necessarily musical, where you're in competition with other people, you're trying to find which level is the best, you don't do that because it's too low, you do that because it's too high. And I'm glad that I just said, I just want to work, I want to move to music, I want to make music, and as long as I don't have to move the chairs around, then I'm happy. And I did all this work that I got. I bought a house within 4 years of 1990, so 94. Yeah. And it started my life as a professional. I didn't have to. I lived as a professional conductor. So it didn't occur to me that I had to trace very carefully what I did. If it was interesting, I did it. If it wasn't, I tried to avoid it. But that's kind of where it came from. It wasn't like I was burning to do it like this. And it does have a cost, because that's what you're seen as. But as since the 2000s, it's not bothered me, because I've had jobs. I've had 2 jobs with orchestras, 2 different orchestras for 6 or 7 years each, where you do the whole repertoire. Yeah. And so I've experienced this basic repertoire I'm telling you about, and it's evened out my life much more. Yes. Of course, if you're going to come to Ensemble Modern, then it's going to be that kind of a program. Yes. And I count you people as my friends, and it's always a joy to come here.
It's mutual.
Yes. And so, it's like coming home. It's a very nice feeling, and there's always energy on the stage. So, long and short of it, I just do whatever repertoire we can find to do mutually.
Right. Wonderful. It leads me to my next question, which is about actually your conducting technique. bit of a personal opinion here. I have to say you're the most unconductorly conductor I've ever come across. I mean, I'll tell you what I mean by that. By that I mean that you don't seem to have the standard kind of Haltung. What do you say? The posture and the kind of distance and the kind of maestrally overview of everything. You are very much a conductor that works with the gestures of the music and the gestures and the musicians around you. What I mean to say is, what I really admire about your conducting is the sense that you have taught yourself about conducting from the music that you conducted. Mm-hmm. And in a way, you're the one conductor I don't see any conducting school around. I don't see. Yes, he studied there. He studied with that person or that one. I just see somebody who has literally learned from his own body, his own and his gestures, and what comes back from them. Is this something you decided, or is it something that you found? You decided that you wanted to just find the what works for yourself, as it were.
Well, I mean, what I said a few minutes ago about what my discovery of conducting was and why I preferred it to playing was that I felt good about moving to music. Whether the people in front of me felt the same is another thing, but I felt good. I felt it came naturally to me. Yeah. There is a technique. I'm interested you say that because I have an ability to be very clear.
Yes,
that's what I mean by technique.
Yeah,
I mean, you as the musicians in more or less complicated music have to be able to tell where one is, for example. Yeah, and I mean these silly things that maybe don't make that impression on the audience, but it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
I'm happy you say that because it links in kind of back to when I was 20.
Yeah.
I teach conducting now at Tangwood. I'm very fortunate to have that role and have for a number of years. I can say that when I started, the problem with conducting is that there are no rules. One generally goes down, but sometimes it doesn't with other people, and orchestras somehow get their of it. If you put a violin,
the one beat one,
yes, what I mean.
Generally goes down, and that's what
there are a few rules, but people don't even do that.
Yes.
But if you put a violin under your chin, or you put any wind instrument near your lips, there are millimeters of variance in where they can be because you can't play it otherwise. It has to be so prescribed what you do to play the instrument, and then glorious music comes out of that. But it's very specific the hold of the etc. Conducting has no rules, no regulations, no hindrances, and so it's actually it's more than a carte blanche. It's more than a blank piece of paper. It's like a blank room. You have nothing hindering it. So you have to invent what to do. Otherwise, you're a windmill.
This is what I want to hear from you.
So I did decide one thing. Given you asked me if I decided, I'm not sure it's all about decision because I don't look at myself for obvious reasons. I'm not making any sound, and I don't really watch videos, and I've seen some things on YouTube, but before you never used to watch yourself unless you brought a camera in there. So I don't know. So you have to relay something. I did decide that there was a very simple clarity that one had to have as the ground zero. The basic fundamental clarity was down, left, right, up, literally. And on top of that, everything came from the needs of the music. And I remember, I've told many students this, I do work hard now, but especially starting physically, I worked. I would do a dress rehearsal with an orchestra in the morning, and I would have lunch and the traditional little bit of a nap. And then at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd open the scores and I'd conduct all the pieces dry. In other words, just... And I remember finding, well, that wasn't very efficient. Can I find a way that it's more efficient? How could I do that gesture?
So you're hearing the music in your head all the time?
You're thinking it.
You're thinking it.
You don't have to hear it. I was trying to imagine how... It was muscle memory. It was practice. How can that gesture... I know I want this to go there. How can I make this gesture just a more... I suppose the word is simple, but more
Expressive, communicative.
expressive and communicative. Right, that's the good words. That doesn't get in the way, doesn't scream. Because I remember Seiji Ozawa said to me, much smaller, don't, because I used to be a windmill. I mean, I remember the piece I did with him was the Benjamin Britten Symphony de Requiem, which has a very fast second movement, and it's very loud and kind of abrasive music.
Yeah.
And he just told me, and I can't imitate him, but no, this small. That's about 1 foot, not 1 meter. And I felt like somebody had tied me up. Yes. But I remember that. And so I tried to follow that after that summer. And all the times I conducted, I'd go back to the room and I would literally practice. And I don't think many conductors practice. They have the CD on to Bernstein and they look in the mirror. That's not practice.
Yes.
This is a bit more theoretical. This is a bit more focused on the way your arm moves. I must say that if you do a lot of conducting on the podium, really working, then it starts to come by itself. What you think is good conducting starts to come when you listen to the musicians' reactions to you. Yeah. There's only so much you can do in the hotel room theoretically. Yeah. And then you start to realize, well, I say this quite often, what's your fault and what's their fault.
Very good. I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. You know, I was clear. Yeah. You were not together. Oh, I didn't do that very well. I'll try it again. That's one of the most important lessons you have to work out. And then on top of that, yes, I decided that some music really had an effect on me, and it was music. It was not sterile. Academic.
Time beating.
Time beating. It had something, and that's when this other layer would become, so to speak, a bit freer, because I tried to give a very basic structure, and I mean basic deliberately. That wasn't. I mean, I see so many people that have all sorts of extra bits which have got nothing to do with anything.
Absolutely.
They don't make the beat clear, and they don't make the music clear, but they also cause interruptions in the way the muscles are working. They can take time, or they can be too quick because the muscles are not even. They're not moving in an even way. I'm not a doctor, but you can see. And I wanted to extract all that very early on, and then to build music on top of that. And then you have experience about, it helps if you've done Beethoven with orchestras as well, what you can let go. You don't have to keep the motor going the whole time. You can actually sit back off it.
Yes, that's the thing. That's what I meant by unconductedly, in the sense that it's not the kind of demonstrative beat that sort of says, do this here. It's a beat that says here, it could take place here, it could take place here, and then we as an ensemble decide to play together, as it were.
That's
or
listening,
we don't.
I would say. I would say that, I mean, it's been interesting teaching a little bit this week.
Yeah.
That it's such a, I had to describe it, it's such a combination of listening, not necessarily following, but listening and sort of guiding through, so things happen. Because it is very common. That's why in an orchestral situation, you need to make friends with the timpani player. The timpani sits almost directly opposite the conductor, right at the back of the orchestra, and makes the rhythmic sounds with beautiful pitches. If the orchestra see you and hear the timpanis, him or her, at the same time, it plays together.
Yeah.
If there's a difference too many times, they get very confused. And so there's a kind of liaison you make with, in that case, I'm talking about the timpani, but it's true with in other situations. You make a liaison with somebody, and if they're playing in the right way, don't mess it up. Right. Just let them go, because everybody hears it and people play off their ears as much as their eyes.
Right. That's the thing. Your conducting is with this kind of fluid, gentle, but very present. I'll say present, not clear. Present beat. It creates that tension of following you, but at the same time listening to each other. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We realize that we are playing with you, but we are playing with each other at the same time. So there's a multi-dimensional awakeness, can we say? Eyes and ears.
Well, I must together. Admit, one is trying to listen to whoever's making music.
And I think that really comes from a conductor's presence and a relaxed presence, as it were. Because in a way, there are many conductors who try and imitate your very relaxed style, and they become incredibly relaxed. It becomes so sort of gentle and fluid that we sort of think we don't care. Well, you know what I mean by we don't care. We just sort of, that's approximately here. Now, with you, you seem to have got that sweet point where we know that we have to be with you, and at the same time we have our ears are opened to being with each other, because it's not we're not entirely just playing on the point, as it were.
Yes.
And that I'm wondering. My question has been heading to that point, literally. How you teach a lot? How can you give that on? How do you pass that?
Well,
because what we're talking about here is an inside intelligence and in the head intelligence and a body intelligence. It's not something you can tell somebody to do.
Yes, and when you get young conductors in their early 20s, which is when I started, they are, I mean, as a joke, I'll say, good afternoon, Mr. Rattle, or hello, Mr. Gegiev. You know, you can see where they've gotten their influences. I don't mind that, because
everybody has to start somewhere.
Similar to Simon Rattle. I mean, it was I come from the same city that he is in Birmingham, where he had the opening of his career. That's what I meant about, you have to find some way of filling that space that is, you have no idea what to put in. Hopefully you move forward, and most of them do. But there are two things I often talk about is tension, because I know that tension causes problems later on in life if you are tense, and it also passes that tension on to the orchestra.
So right.
I'm not saying in one day. I don't know, actually. I've always said, if you were to do this, especially with a group, I mean, it isn't 12 violins. And, if you were to do it this tight for a few hours, they wouldn't. They would probably start to tense up, clench themselves. Singers is the other thing. If you don't breathe, or you are stressy with them, you know, the upper part of their chest, which is bad for them, starts to get tense, and there are not only injuries, but it doesn't sound as good.
Exactly.
And so I don't know if I decided that, but I remember I do consciously avoid tension, because I don't want it in my own body.
Right.
And I think that it passes, it's not good for the music and other bodies. And I think you get a different sound if it just has this sort of freedom in the sound. And people, I mean, I very often, these are more technical things, but the way you move can link completely in a subtext to how the strings move their bows.
Yes.
If you use roughly the amount of space that they take for a bow, and not twice as much, which some people do, at roughly the speed that they would use it, they will all start to move together. And then you can easily control it. It all comes, I mean, obviously, the way I'm speaking to you now, you can see I've thought about it, but it's over a long time, and I don't read books about it, and it's on the podium. You can sort of see when this is all starting to breathe of its own accord, and then you sort of work out maybe what you maybe had done to help that.
Right. Just to move on somewhat, but around the same subject. How do you choose the repertoire that you want to conduct or don't want to conduct? Where you
draw the line?
Yes.
Well, again, it depends on which repertoires you're talking about. I mean, you had a manager, Elmer Weingartner, for a few years, and he used to be the manager of the Berlin Philharmonic. Yeah. So he invited me out for a simple meal one night, and because he wanted to talk some programs that I would do with you at a later point. And he said, and he sort of brought out some very well-known pieces of Elliott Carter, but he obviously hadn't heard of. And I was laughing because, yes, I do know A Mirror on Which to Dwell quite well. It's one of the great pieces of Carter. I'd be happy to do it. He said, it's so much more interesting talking about this repertoire than having an argument with a conductor whether it's Bruckner 4 or Bruckner 5. And I remember that story. I just don't care. If it's Bruckner 4 or 5, of course I'm happy.
Right.
If there's a kind of musical aesthetic, and I'm talking about the really more recent music, that I have no connection to, I find it very difficult. I'm very uncomfortable physically and mentally. It's not a question of naming names, but if the aesthetic, how do I put it like this? You can often tell if a composer is musical or not. Somehow the phrases naturally flow. There's a certain logic to the, if you want to call it harmony, you can call it, but there's a certain logic to the way the notes
follow one another.
following one another. And after a certain amount of time, you can feel it. And I'm happy if I'm with a musician. If there's somebody, and there's nothing wrong with that, if there's somebody who is writing a pictorial thesis in front of you, I just don't think I have very much to say. And so, in a way, their argument would be, well, I'll just write a piece of Schubert then. Yeah, you're right. I mean, if our definition of music isn't always looking backwards, then you have a point.
Yeah.
Music maybe have to create its own identity over the last well, now it must be 40 years from a completely different type.
Yeah.
It's just I'm not the one for it.
Right.
I can't really do it.
Yeah.
So I sort of if I'm dealing with music of a sort, and it can be quite heavy music. I mean, for some reason, Harrison Birtwistle, since that first encounter with him, I've always loved all of his music. Yeah. I love the man; he's a wonderful man. But his music, and it's very hard on the musicians, especially the orchestra.
Yes.
They don't have a good time because they often are sweating after it, and they've played so many notes. Somehow it feels to me like grabbing earth first thing in the morning, and there's a bit of dew on it. There's something very basic about it. So that's my image. I'm happy. I don't mind.
Right.
So I know that. Other pieces just leave me cold, cold as fish.
Right. I think that's about it. Yeah. I hope we continue to work together.
Yes, very nice.
And with more and more interesting programs.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you.
That was Nebenstimmen, a podcast by Ensemble Modern.